Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, why should more conservationists learn to study people? To better understand them as individuals, as communities and societies, alongside their complex behaviours and interactions. Well, this is what today's podcast is all about, and it's something termed social science. Here to discuss the power of social science from a conservation perspective is today's guest, Dr Rebecca Jefferson. Now, Rebecca runs Human Nature, which is a social enterprise which seeks to empower conservationists to have more positive impact on the planet through training, collaboration and support. And we talk about why social science is important for conservationists and how it can be used to tackle wildlife declines. And we also discuss the benefits of people with different backgrounds and disciplines working in partnership to have better outcomes for conservation projects. Rebecca also shares her journey in setting up a business with impact at its core, alongside her advice for others like you who might be seeking to follow in her footsteps. It's a people partnering, social sciencing, conservation pod chat. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Rebecca or Bex Jefferson, and I'm the founder and director of Human Nature.
Great. Well, thank you for joining the podcast, Bex, and thank you for being in a podcast recording studio, our first guest in a kind of professional studio, looking great, sounding great. It's good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks.
We've known each other now for what, I don't know, a couple of years or something like that. And we've had little chats here and there and kind of supported and helped one another and shared what's going on. And I'm really keen to kind of see where you are in terms of Human Nature, what you're offering. And also just to kind of share your story, I think, with people, because I find it really inspiring, like, you know, what you're doing and where you've come from. So thanks for finding the time to chat. We really appreciate that. Let's start with, we're going to talk about human nature and what it is and how you can help people. But the foundation of it is all about social science. And I was just saying kind of before we recorded and the little preamble, I don't really fully know what social science is. Obviously, it's a growing thing within conservation. It's a different way of tackling conservation questions. But I'm coming at this as almost a beginner, and I'm really wanting to understand, you know, what is social science? How is it important for conservationists? How can we use it? You know, what are the steps? But let's start with almost like a definition. Like, what is social science for the unappointed like myself?
So, in a nutshell, social science is the evidence of people. It's
Right.
our understanding and our investigations of what people do and how they interact with the world around them, the people around them. And it's not just something within conservation. So social science, if you drop the conservation bit for a moment, It's where we understand things like education and how schools work and how children learn, or how adults learn. It's where we think about how people deal with risk, or, you know, to undertake a risky behavior or they don't, how they vote, voting patterns. And it's used by schools, as I mentioned, it's used by councils, it's used by governments, it's used in all sorts of different ways. And in terms of what conservation social science is, it's taking all those expertise, those disciplines, those specialist methods, and putting them through the lens of how do we work towards a healthier planet for people and for nature. So you take, you know, it's social science is kind of an umbrella term for lots of different disciplines. So you've got things like psychology and sociology and anthropology, you know, big long list, and you will find environmental psychology or conservation psychology. You'll find that version of those disciplines, which is specifically saying, you know, we're taking that way of thinking and exploring the world and putting it through that conservation lens. And the reason why it's so important, and this is maybe not what everybody wants to hear, but conservation is about people. Conservation is about plants and animals. You know, there's an important part of it, but actually when we really look at it, the problems we are dealing with in conservation are by and large driven by human behavior. So it's what we all do that causes the problems that we're trying to fix in conservation. It's people who define the degradation and the habitat loss, and we define that as a problem. You know, to the best of our knowledge of how we know that animals perceive the world, they don't understand the biodiversity crisis, for example. That caveat that maybe there are things going on that we don't know about in terms of animal perception. And then when we look at managing and responding to the conservation crisis, the part of the system that we manage is people. We create laws, we change where people are allowed to go in order to let one habitat recover or a species. It's the people that we manage. So in those sort of three ways, conservation is about people, but it's also the other elements about where conservation and people are really important is when we are experiencing, the conservation crises, the ecological crises, the consequences of those are felt by people. Mm-hmm. So, if you lose forestry in an area and, tree cover and there's increased soil erosion and that makes, changes hydrography patterns, changes flooding patterns and things like that, it's people as well as nature that are impacted. So how do we understand those impacts? And then when you try and go in and reforest that area and there's a conservation initiative to fix, in inverted commas, fix that problem, well, how does that affect those people? How do those people, what does that mean for those communities that are there? So at every point, we're talking about people. So when we come into conservation and we look very much from a biological perspective and a natural sciences perspective, we're missing huge parts of the picture and huge parts of the evidence.
Yeah, that's so clearly put. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I do feel that, as conservationists, and a lot of people come in because we are passionate about an animal or a plant or an ecosystem or a place or whatever. And at some point in a typical career, we realize actually it's much more about people and influencing and helping, supporting and understanding people. But that's not something we're typically trained in, as whether an ecologist or a biologist or whatever, zoologist, whatever our background, our training is, in conservation. And that's where social science comes in, because without social science, you don't understand the problem, which is often people related. You understand the solutions, which people can help with, or the impact on the people and everything that connects through that. Yeah. I read a little bit on your site before the chat, a nice example that ecologists are good at kind of studying plants, animals, and I'm gonna get it wrong and paraphrase it incorrectly, but we're very good at kind of studying the ecology of ecosystems and problems like that. But we're not very good at understanding why humans act like they do. Why are they dropping an anchor into a reef, or why are we not managing to change policy when we know actually it makes sense from almost every perspective, but we're bringing kind of ecological, facts to the table. Yeah. What?
And
yeah, go on.
At that point. So you should be. That's what we need ecologists to do that. So I'm very clear that this is not one type of evidence over another. Kind of my vision would be for us to be able to talk about conservation evidence as a jigsaw puzzle with lots of different pieces, and you draw on the appropriate pieces of that jigsaw of evidence depending on the topic or the issue or the location you're in. And because there are so many sources of conservation evidence. So yes, there's natural sciences, there's physical sciences, there's medical sciences, veterinary sciences, but that's just sitting within the sciences. There's indigenous knowledge, there's traditional ecological knowledge, there's the arts. There's so many ways that we can understand the world and the challenges we're trying to resolve, and so many types of outputs we're looking for. We need to be drawing on a much more diverse range of types of evidence. One of those is natural science, which we absolutely need. One of those is social science, which we need. And there's a whole host of other things. And that will be from, research and academia, but also from practice and from other less commonly areas less commonly thought of as sources of evidence.
Yeah. It feels like such a rich, untapped scene from a wildlife conservation perspective in terms of the expertise that you're describing, isn't very typical within wildlife conservation. You might disagree, but that's my sense. And what you're talking about is something that's quite interdisciplinary. So it's about pulling in lots of different types of skills to try and sort of tackle a kind of core problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And transdisciplinary as well, which is getting across outside of, the traditional research. Traditionally what we think of as research. So yeah, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary may tick off all those important buzzwords.
Good. Got to get them in. Great. Let's try and bring it to life a little bit then. So I sort of mentioned the example I saw on your website about, why are people dropping anchors on this particular reef that maybe we want to protect or something like that. The understanding of why people are acting like they do and behaving like they do. How would a social scientist go about answering a question like that? Because I'm assuming it's quite different to maybe a natural science approach. Like, what are the kind of methodologies that a social scientist would use that we as wildlife conservationists should have a bit of an overview of, or an understanding that at least they exist?
So, I mean, the answer there is it depends what discipline that they work in, what type of social scientist, because just as natural science is really diverse across, all the different natural science disciplines, social science is equally, so it depends. But one of the big areas that we think about in conservation is around psychology. So you're talking about behavior.
Yeah.
And lots of the people I work with, lots of the organizations I work with are trying to bring about behavior change, because lots of conservation comes back to behavior change. That was that middle point about that's where we bring in the solutions, and we're very, very often changing a behavior of someone somewhere. And psychologists, well, just a little in a little nutshell, is that often we come at behavior change from a perspective of what's called the knowledge deficit model. That's like a default setting of, well, they don't know that there is that the thing they're doing, that they're dropping that anchor in the reef or the seagrass bed, is damaging that seagrass bed. So therefore, if we tell them, they'll stop. Okay, right. So we put together the campaign and we tell people, and but actually people are still dropping their anchor in that seagrass bed. Oh, hang on, that didn't work. And this is, you think of anti-smoking campaigns, all sorts of things. You may even find that there are behaviors you do yourself, which you shouldn't do. I'd probably eat a bit too much chocolate, shall we say.
I just had too much peanut butter for lunch, so yes.
Yeah. So, knowledge isn't the answer. Yeah. And when you look at it from a psychologist perspective, they will look at models of behavior change. So they will bring in models around what are the different barriers and enablers, and they'll look at things like, well, what's happening in an individual level, an individual consciousness, what's the infrastructure to enable that person to act differently, what's the wider, what are the social norms, what are the external picture, what's the culture. So, why are they anchoring there? Well, is it because there's nowhere else to anchor? Is it because that's the best place to be? Is it, there's all sorts of ways that you can then look at that. And it's actually probably one of the biggest gaps that I see in organizations, where they are actually doing a huge amount, putting masses of their resource into behavior change and not working with behavioral scientists, and not working to understand those theories, decades of research into looking at why people do what they do, and not bringing that into that conservation space.
It's really interesting. Why don't we have more social scientists involved within wildlife conservation? Like, why aren't? Because you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people, do kind of assume if they give more information, then people will act and change differently. But you're right. I mean, we all know actually fundamentally that's not right. And behavioral scientists, social scientists can come in and help us. So why don't we have more in the sector already in terms of wildlife conservation? And what does the future look like? Is that changing? Are you seeing any change in kind of people's attitude towards this sort of approach?
So there was a paper a few years ago by Charlie Gardner, and he looked at what the sort of the curriculum in the UK undergraduate and postgraduate degrees that were kind of feeding into the conservation sector. And at that level, we're not training at the university level. He basically found that there isn't very much in there about social science. So graduates are coming out and going into the conservation sector without an understanding of qualitative methods or quantitative methods for social science, or the breadth of disciplines, or that kind of understanding that evidence is there and exists. And so there's that kind of, it feels like it's about plants and animals, so that's what I'll study. I think there's also an element of how we think as a sector about people and how we value people. So, it's slightly contentious for me to say what I said earlier about conservation is about people. But we have there can be a kind of a mistrust of people. and a belief that, well, I can kind of see a bit of logic of, it's people's behavior that gets us into this problem, therefore people are bad. And I don't think it's as blunt as that, but I think there's a mistrust that if you're not an expert in understanding seagrass ecology or coral reef ecology, how can you be trusted to protect it? And that's a pretty big can of worms to be opening. But how, I talk to lots of different people and conservation professionals, and some will come to me and say, oh, I really want to learn about social science because I really want to be able to better communicate what we're doing and get get the facts out there, get the answers out there, and have greater not greater agency, a greater uptake of what we're trying to do. So they're kind of seeing of trying to get their answers out. And you talk to other people, other conservation professionals, who will say, oh, I need to understand people so that we can work together to develop and to co-develop how we move forward, just to jointly work together and solve this problem. And I was at a conference in the summer, the International Congress on Conservation Biology, and I saw someone present there. Her name was Kayla Cranston, and she said, I might misquote her, she said something like her vision is to see that conservation professionals are able to say the action I'm advocating it for it because the community has asked me to do this. And I mean the human community in this case. So she's saying that what her vision is that we are at a point as a sector where we are working so well with people that we are the enablers of the solutions that they want to see and the visions they want to see, rather than saying, well, that you come in and solve the problem.
Yeah.
And that's not about conservationists not getting a say and having to, keep their mouths shut. That's about conservationists sitting alongside other stakeholders, and which they often do. Lots of processes put conservationists along. I've worked in some of those processes, and being able to kind of jointly work together and then kind of advocate for what's been decided as being the best way forwards.
Rather than being an educator, if you like, informing people what they need to do, it's about being a partner and sort of working with others and collaborating. And
there are examples. This happens, and I'm not meaning to paint the sector in this terrible light. There are plenty of NGOs and plenty of organizations working with behavioral scientists, working with communities, doing fabulous work. So I'm not wishing to suggest in any way that we're going wrong. So which I suppose brings me on to the other point of your question is where things are changing, and they really are, actually. So if you look back about 20 years ago, there was a pretty seminal paper by Mike Massier and co-authors saying, come on, we really need some social science in conservation. There's a kind of a call to action. And we're now at the point where you're getting, similar papers which are call for action, but they're calls for action for, bat conservation or marine sciences or, ornithology. And it's taking it to that sort of finer detail. And it's like that call is being taken to the next level of, okay, well, what does this look like? How do we do it in this particular field? How do we bring for this group of conservation, this corner of conservation? What does that look like? And there is increasing amounts of interdisciplinary funding, of interdisciplinary degrees, interdisciplinary centres, transdisciplinary centres. All those, that is changing. That is, and it is, thank goodness. I would say it's not changing fast enough, but then I think most things in conservation and the world at large are not changing fast enough in the direction we want them to go. So that's, again, it's not a dig, it's a sort of reality. And I'd worked recently with a funder, and he came on one of my courses, and he said to me, we want to be able to encourage the people we're funding to bring in the people and to understand social science and to use that in their projects. But when we then review those grant proposals, we don't actually have the skills to know if what they're suggesting is good. We can do it for the natural sciences because that's what we're good at. That's what the funding organization was skilled in, and that's where their foundations were. And he grasped that gap and was trying to change it, was taking action to build his skills in order to allow them to get to that vision.
Yeah.
Great. And so those sorts of things are happening.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, even just looking at things like community-based conservation, it feels quite related and interlinked with what we're talking about, working in partnership with often local indigenous communities to understand problems, create solutions, enact them, support, and everything else. That feels like it's been a big shift in the last 10 years, certainly, maybe even 20 years, a bit further out off the back of this, but it doesn't feel enough actually when you put it in the context like you do. And we list 15,000 plus jobs a year on our website, and I can't think of hardly any social scientist specific roles. I'm sure they exist. It's a little bit like economists too, actually. I feel there's a deficit of economists within the sector kind of coming in and embedding within it, and helping those services. And again, that's not a dig at people not coming in. It feels like we're not moving quick enough as a conservation sector to bring in these skills, which really are going to help us. We're getting quite good at communicating. We're really good at studying and researching and enacting, but actually we do miss the human angle, and we do miss the kind of the economic money angle too, I think.
Yeah, and those roles are there, and then increasingly, we perhaps come onto it in a little bit and talk about where I've been, but there was a period of time where I was the first social scientist at a large NGO, and I used to meet people. For a period of time, I was the only social scientist in that science department, and I would meet other people, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm the first social scientist," or "I'm the only social scientist in my organisation." And we used to joke that we were going to start a little club because it was quite a lonely place to be sometimes. Exciting, but had its particular challenges. And those roles, they are more and more there. And actually, I hadn't thought of going through your listings to look at how many jobs or how many roles and whether that's changing over time. But I definitely think there are more jobs coming through.
Yeah, we could do that. I might do that off the back of this, actually, just do a quick keyword search in the archive and see what there is. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Human Nature then, which is this organisation you established in recent years. I don't know how old you are, but you're a few years old now, I guess.
Registered in the middle of 2019. That's the company's house birthday. But I launched it in January 2020.
Just before the world changed slightly.
Yeah. So I launched it, and then I left my nice, secure paid job. I left on Brexit Day, so I left the same day we left Europe, which was a slightly weird feeling. Yeah. I then had 6 weeks working on the particular contract that I was working on, whilst also juggling a small child who had repeated infections and kept not going to nursery because they were poorly. And then at the end of that 6 weeks, my family and I went into an early lockdown because we thought my husband had COVID. And that was not on the plan when I left my job, and it was like, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to launch Human Nature. It's doing it. I've been thinking about it for a while. It's been in the grown from a tiny seed of an idea into this thing that I think it's like, let's do it. Yeah, and then I'd put 3 in-person courses out that I was advertising, which of course immediately had to be pulled, and that's how it started.
But you're still here, it's 2023. Tell us a bit about Human Nature. What is it? If people don't know who you are, what you do, how can you help people? What do you offer?
So Human Nature is a social enterprise. It's me, and we empower people to empower conservation individuals and organizations to use and to engage with and use social sciences. So essentially, because you've got lots of people in the sector who have got a natural sciences background and not familiar with social sciences, lots of organizations that are structured around a natural science set of values and set of ways of working. I help people through training and mentoring to build their capacity, to allow them to in some cases to actually go out and do social science research,
Yep.
in some cases to build their capacity so they can work alongside social scientists in interdisciplinary projects, so that they understand a bit more about the methods and the ways that those partners are working in. And also then for organizations who are bringing in and trying to build this new area of this evidence area that's new to them. So trying to broaden out what they do. And I run online courses, see previous comments.
Yep.
Mostly online courses. I have got my first in-person course out now at the moment, which is very exciting. So I do a 1-day course, which is a kind of a first step into social science for people who really are thinking, well, what is it? So we go through what it is, how it's done, so a bit of an overview of the methods, and think about why it's vital to conservation and how it can work for the individuals. There's a new course which is qualitative methods for conservation. So we look particularly at the text-based methods. So if your background is in quantitative research and quantitative data,
which I see as figures and facts and analysis of numbers.
It's numbers, basically. It's numbers. Yep, numerical data. And then we start, somebody, your supervisor says, oh, can you run a workshop, run a focus group? Can you do some interviews with those stakeholders? And you then end up with pages of text, and you're looking at it thinking, what do I do? So that's qualitative methods, and that course is designed for those people who are basically needing to go out and do qualitative methods, which are so rich and so powerful at understanding people's, the complexity of people's relationships with the topics and the issues that we're dealing with. They're so important as part of that evidence jigsaw. Yep. But they are a specialist set of methodologies, and just like, you wouldn't go out bird ringing without being trained in it. Yeah. It's the equivalent for social science methods to learn those skills. And then I also work with organizations. So next year there is a new program called the Catalyst program, which is 8 months. I'll be working with individuals from 5 organizations who are trying to bring about change within their organization. So either bringing social science in for the first time, or kind of coalescing what they're already doing and trying to formulate where they go and increase that. And we will be writing, each of them will write a sort of a strategy and an action plan that helps them get and access the value that social science can bring them. So that's going to be a mixture of group work and one-to-one work, and I'm really excited about that. I've done one-to-one work with a few organizations now, and it's great. I mean, it's so exciting to see whole organizations and look at that sort of scale of change. But this time, this coming program is going to be bringing five of those kind of champions together to and support each other, as well as then supporting their organizations. So
sounds really exciting. Sounds like you've got loads going on. And
yes.
Lots and helping different people in different ways as well, just from like an understanding and an overview of what the toolbox is and how it can help you, and so actually implementing it within your organization, and on a kind of deeper, longer term level, actually enabling a plan to kind of take place. How have you found the process of kind of you've talked about COVID and the challenges at the beginning, and having a child that's ill and all that sort of stuff, but how have you found the process of establishing a social enterprise as you have, or an eco enterprise? Why did you start it? Why did you want to do it? And have you got any tips you might want to share with others who have an idea they're excited about, that they think they'd like to make happen? Like what advice would you give them?
So how have I found
about 5 different questions there fired at you? So
I missed one. You'll have to prompt me on it. So how did it come about? It came about because I saw this opportunity. I started out in ecology in the undergrad, realized I kind of wanted to understand people, and that's what took me into social sciences. And I kept meeting people who were having that same realization. I think you mentioned it a little bit before. And that sort of, if you're 5, 10, 20 years into your career, and you suddenly realize there's this huge area of evidence and skill set and expertise that you've not engaged with, and you've suddenly realized is really important to meet that goal that you were working towards. It's a bit of a shock, and I've seen that shock on people's faces, and it's quite a kind of scary place to be. And I kept meeting people who were having that realization, and then saying, well, hang on, what, a bit like you said at the beginning, what is it? How do I do it? What are the methods? What am I going to do? And some of those people will just go out and use the methods, and that's pretty dangerous. But you get, at that stage, do you go and do a master's? Do you go and do a PhD? If you're working, you're probably quite hard for a lot of people. So I could see this opportunity where I was able to talk to people and to sort of guide them through. And I was having those conversations about, being that bridge for them. And there was this need because there wasn't that kind of midway point of, well, where are the courses on this? So it came about because I saw a real opportunity. And in no way did I ever foresee that I would be running my own business at all. That was never, I don't come from an entrepreneurial background, so it's a bit of a shock to be in that position. But that's where it came from. And being able to kind of match the things that I can do. I'm good at training and teaching, and I've got some experience in that, and understand the social science and understand the ecology. And so, yeah, it just felt like a natural next step for me. I'm just trying to think what the other four questions.
So you've got the idea. I can see where that came from. How have you? What are the steps you take and then turn that into a business? Because there's more than just an idea in terms of making a business happen. And you're 3-4 years in now. And what have you learned from that process, that someone sat there with their own idea and their own business they'd like to start, which has conservation or impact at its core? Like, what would you, I mean, is your advice don't do it, or just be honest? Like, what was your transparent sort of view of setting these things up, and how could people learn from that?
My view is absolutely explore whether you can do it. Absolutely, because we need different ways of thinking, and we need different ways of working. So absolutely, if you've got an idea and you can see a gap, really go and explore it and figure it out. I think the approach I took, and I'm not totally sure I want to admit to this, I think and maybe COVID was an element of this. I think I did a bit of a jump and make your parachute on the way down, which I can't. I'm surprised that in my review that's actually what I think probably actually happened, because I did a bit of, everything you do in business is an experiment, and actually everything we do in conservation is probably an experiment as well, because you learn and you feedback and you do it differently next time. So I brought together. There was a point in the COVID step where I'd obviously cancelled the in-person courses, and there was a point at which I had to just to do something. I had to get moving, and I set myself a deadline and was like, right, I'm going to put a course out. I've got this course planned. I can do it. And I leapt. I printed out a page with 30 lines on it, one for every day of the month, did something every day, and within that time I'd sold out my first course. And
wow.
So you've just got to jump at some stage, and I will tell you, it is terrifying. It just is. Putting services out and courses out is scary. And the experience of running my own business it's hard, but it's absolutely, I love it so much. You have to be able to do whatever needs to be done. So if it's just you either need to build a network of support in terms of people you work with. Like, so for example, I didn't design my logo. I got someone to do that. I paid someone to do that, paid someone to build my second website. I built my own first one. But you've got to be able to drive it and think about all those different things. I would say learning a bit more about how businesses function. If I was advising someone, I think that would probably be a more sensible way to start. Thinking about where your finances are coming from. What do your products look like? How does that build a financially sustainable business? Who are you working with? Who are your target audience? What do they want? What do they think? So, if you've got that kernel of an idea, get out and talk to people about it. Listen to what they're saying. If they don't like it and they tweak it, that's okay, because they're giving you information about what they need, and your ideas will develop. That's okay. And understanding what's really important to you. What's the vision that you're working towards? What does the world look like when you've made the difference you want to make? And where's your contribution to it? How do you bring what you're good at, what you enjoy, what really what lights you up and gives you energy? How do you bring all that together and join it into that vision that you're working towards to create the organization that allows you to flourish, because that's where, if we're talking about conservation, we're talking about impact driven organizations. That's where you'll make your biggest impact, where those things are aligned. And I doing something you enjoy is not code for, it'll be, what is it they say, do the thing you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is not true. And that's not true. I do something I love and I work really hard. And I love it. And I come off, I was speaking to somebody yesterday, the first person who's in the Catalyst program for next year. And I come off the call buzzing. It's exhilarating working with people and seeing the difference that you're making. But it's still work that you put in, and it's still, you still got to do the graft. So it isn't easy. Yeah.
Oh, it's great though. And I feel the same actually about even these discussions on the podcast. I usually come off them absolutely buzzing, loving hearing and sharing people's passion for what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing hearing, and you're a perfect example of that, Bex, too. Like someone who's like the Venn diagram, if you like, the Ikigai idea of, what do you love doing? What are you good at doing? And what does the world need? Bring that together, find that sweet spot, and then share that with the world and kind of help the world to kind of shape that idea. And then I like the fact you just jumped and gone for it and sort of figured it out as you've gone along.
Yeah.
It's really brave.
I'm not sure if that's what I thought I was doing at the time.
No.
I feel we moved slightly into therapy.
Yeah. But at the time, but on reflection, you did. I've a sort of similar sort of path myself in sort of trying to find where I want my impact to be. And from my side, I sort of did it as a side hustle for a while. I guess that's another way of doing it, isn't it? So I used to do work 5 days a week for BirdLife International, and then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, basically, and slowly kind of ratcheted across as I could actually see, there's more opportunity for me to create impact here than there, and that's just other ways of doing things as well. But yeah, I think also just piggybacking on your advice, like, I think not waiting too long as well, I think is important. I think you can overanalyze and overplan, and at some point you just got to get it out there and share it and learn fast. Like fail fast is another motto people have in the world, isn't it? Fail fast and learn fast. And I think that does help in this environment too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the curse of perfectionism stopped a lot of really good ideas moving forwards. And you know what? It'll never be perfect. I do feedback off my courses, and I can get someone says, I've had it recently. Someone says, "Oh, why did you give us all this literature? Why did you give us citations and resources? You should have just put it on in the course." And another person saying, "Oh, thank you so much for this literature and the resource list. It's so valuable. I've really enjoyed going through and reading the papers." And you know what? I put it on because it's a short course, and we touch on a whole load of topics, and the resources give people an opportunity to springboard into the bit that works for them. That's my justification, and that's also the fact that I cite papers and things. So there's a responsibility to cite what you to include that. But I just thought it's a really interesting illustration of, some days I think, right, I've got to make a perfect course. It's got to be perfect for everybody, and actually they're all different people with different needs, and that's okay. And that's kind of how it goes. The practice makes progress. Do the best you can and do the things that feel right to you and aligned with how you want to show up and what you value and the ways you want to work. And do your best and try your best to serve your clients. But at the end of the day, everybody's different. So
and you can't please them all. I like the idea of perfection being a barrier too. I really feel that too, and a motto of mine is good enough is good enough. It's the 80-20 rule about you can get a lot done if you're not aiming for perfection, actually. And really I think
80% at university was a first class degree, which most people would say was pretty perfect. So
more than enough. Exactly. I'm conscious of time. We've got some lovely people listening in and they want to ask some questions as well. So once we turn the recording off, we'll be turning over to you guys that are listening in our audience to ask questions. But I want to kind of start sort of wrapping up with a few things. One is a potted history of your career. When you look back, like, what have been the kind of key moments that have been important to you to get you to where you are now?
What are the key moments? I suppose the key moments would have been pursuing the things I loved or felt right, actually. So my did you want the potted history of my career?
In a nutshell.
In a very small nutshell.
Yeah.
Basically, I loved rock pools and the pond as a kid. Went to university to study marine biology. Loved it, absolutely loved it. But kind of thought, well, hang on, we're learning about all this stuff like biodiversity hotspots, and that overlaps with these areas of, real, social, huge areas of poverty, things like that. Where are the people? We aren't just going to solve these problems that we're learning about with this information that we're learning about. So it took me into learning about social sciences, into an interdisciplinary PhD, then into marine governance postdocs, and then I moved to the Royal Society for Protection of Birds and was the first social scientist in their team of about 80 to 100 natural scientists, where they, as a science team within a very large environmental NGO, were dipping their toe and saying, oh, hang on, what does this social science, what does this look like for us? Is this important? And whilst I was there, I worked with a great team, and we established social science as a permanent part of that science team. And that was, really exciting. And along that, the bits of the research that I was doing, one of the big pieces of research I did was I did a review with a team of authors where we reviewed 349 studies of public perceptions of the ocean.
I love the fact you still know the number. Yeah.
Yeah, etched in my mind. And we were looking at studies where researchers had gone out to find out, what did people think of the sea, what did people understand about problems, etc. And that was again a different way of understanding how much desire there was to want to access, to want to engage with the social sciences. But for example, around, I think it was 71% of those studies used questionnaires as their method. When you look at the diversity of marine habitats, of coastlines across the world, the diversity of the human communities, the types of challenges that marine conservation is facing, the ways that we're understanding what society thinks about that, we're using one method to measure 70% of that research. There's a huge toolbox of methods available in social science, and I just thought, it's a really clear indication that we are not understanding this value of what social science is, all the amazing different methods that we could be using to answer those questions of how do people connect with the sea, how do people understand marine conservation. There's a need there. So there was lots of different threads that then led me to that, to leaping out into human nature.
And we're glad you did. As we sort of start to wrap up, then I'm going to ask you some sort of more open questions, then, just to kind of hear a bit about how you think. A nice, easy opener. If we could take you to one place in the world and you could see one species, where would you go? What would you look at?
I mean, that's really hard. My kids have got that pictorial atlas of an encyclopedia of animals.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anything on any of those pages, open it and pick a page. So I did in my master's, I did phytoplankton virology, and the chance to see like zooplankton and phytoplankton to be tiny, and just to see those tiny, engines of the planet, and I think that would be pretty cool.
Well, like alien creatures, we'd have to shrink you right down, but that's fine, and give you a tiny scuba kit, but that's okay as well.
The tiny scuba kit might be a tricky, but and I think they're just so stunningly beautiful. And to watch them kind of, I do an impression of a copepod, which I shan't do right now, but it doesn't work on a podcast. To see them moving through the water that we think of in this kind of very one way, and to see it moving in such a different way, and the whole world that we can't see. So maybe I'd have that.
Amazing. Yeah. If I could make you a global czar for the day, so you can enact any law, create any decree, whatever you want to call it, ultimately to try and benefit the environment in some way, what law, decree would you choose?
Wow. I think it's probably going to be influenced by a book I've been reading. I don't know how you'd actually do it, but it'd be something around seeing the good in people and being able to see and, trust that other people want good things for the world too. It's not just you that believes that we should look after nature. It's not just you that believes we should look after each other, and that a healthier planet will be better for people and nature. And I think some way of seeing that goodness, and that's influenced by a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, where he is talking about basically that people are good, and he goes through the very, very convincingly looking at humans. And I'm near the end, but yeah, and it's also influenced by there was a study in 2019 which showed that biospheric and altruistic values, so i.e. caring about the planet and caring for others, are the highest values across. It was a huge study across 12 different countries, and that came out on top in every society that they looked at. So we are, but they also said we hide this belief, that we hide these values because we think other people don't think like that. And actually, yeah, we're actually all doing okay, and I think that would help.
It's a really positive way of viewing the world, and I love it. Yeah, it's a nice message to be sharing too. I've never asked this question before the podcast, but I think it's well worth asking. Why should people care about wildlife?
Why should they? For whatever reason resonates with them. So yes, we can argue it intrinsically that we have moral obligation, and that wildlife has as much standing and as much right. You can argue it from a utilitarian perspective, that it's keeping us alive. I think yesterday, I heard someone on the news talking about what proportion of our medicines come from plant species.
Yep, I heard that.
Yeah. It's keeping us alive is I know that's very utilitarian kind of, it is keeping us alive, and the healthier the ecosystem is, the healthier we can be.
Yeah.
But it's whatever works for them. That I think we value things for different reasons, and that's okay. But hopefully we get to that point where they do value it.
Right. On that message, thank you so much, Bex Jefferson from Human Nature, coming on the podcast. It's lovely to kind of reconnect, to share your story, and to kind of see where you're going as well. You're doing a great thing in the world. So if people want to find out more about you and Human Nature specifically, where should they go? Where should we send them?
Well, thank you for the invite. It's been great to talk to you as well. So to find out about Human Nature, there's our website, which is humannature.co.uk. You can find out about what we do and a bit more about me. And there's an option there to subscribe to our newsletter, which is once or twice a month, depending on how often the newsletter goes out. And I'm also on LinkedIn, either as me, as Rebecca Jefferson. There's also a Human Nature page as well. So yeah, feel free to connect on there and message me. It'd be great to hear from people if they've got questions or they've got ideas. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and as always, we'll put the links in the kind of show notes and below wherever you're listening to this from as well. And I'm a subscriber to your email as well, so do get them. So yeah, thanks once again. Yeah. All right. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy, or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.